Imagine finding yourself on the edge of life and death. When two young children are stranded on a cliff, they must rely on each other to survive. In this heart-stopping story of bravery, innocence, and survival, one boy will face a life or death choice. Imagine finding yourself on the edge of life and death. When two young children are stranded on a cliff, they must rely on each other to survive. In this heart-stopping story of bravery, innocence, and survival, one boy will face a life or death choice. Malik, a 9-year-old black boy, stands frozen at the edge of a jagged cliff, his heart pounding against his chest. His worn-out brown shirt clings to his back as the wind whips fiercely around him. His pants, slightly too big for him, flap against his legs as if the world itself is trying to force him into the abyss. Beside him, clinging to a nearby rock with wide eyes, is Lily, a white 8-year-old girl, her hands shaking as she grips the ledge. Her blonde hair, tangled from the wind, sticks to her face as she trembles in fear. The two children are caught on this perilous cliffside, the vast sea roaring beneath them, threatening to pull them into its depths. Every second feels like a lifetime as they stand there, knowing they must act before the cliff claims them. The cliff edge is narrow, the drop below dizzying. Malik can feel the ground shifting under his feet, a tremor of uncertainty running through him as the wind picks up. There's no immediate help, no one to hear their screams. The sea below churns with violent waves, as if reminding them of the gravity of their situation. The rocks around them are sharp, unforgiving, and every move is a potential mistake. Malik can hear Lily's breath coming in short, panicked gasps, and it takes all of his strength to calm his own nerves enough to think clearly. The air smells salty, the taste of fear almost palpable, as it mixes with the scent of the ocean breeze. The danger is real, and time is running out. They have no time to waste. Every second that passes is a step closer to the edge, both literally and figuratively. They must escape, or the cliff will take them. Malik glances at Lily, her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto his, and he knows that whatever happens, he must find a way to get them both to safety. He forces himself to look away from her face, scanning the cliff for any way out. To the left, a narrow ledge disappears into the mist, barely visible. To the right, the rocks continue their jagged climb, sharp and treacherous. There's no clear path, no sign of rescue, just the sound of the wind and the relentless roar of the waves crashing below. "Lily," Malik whispers, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We need to move. It's dangerous here. Can you stand?" Lily, eyes wide with terror, nods slightly but doesn't make a move. Her hands grip the ledge tighter, her small body trembling. Malik feels his heart race faster. They don't have time to hesitate. They can't stay here, not for one more minute. The ground feels unstable under him, like it might give way at any moment, sending them both tumbling into the sea. He steps closer to the edge, careful not to look down. His heart pounds, and every instinct screams at him to run, but he knows they can't. Not without each other. He reaches out his hand to Lily. "Come on, we have to move now. You can do it." Lily doesn't respond at first. The wind howls again, and the rocks seem to tremble beneath them. Malik's throat tightens as he glances back at her, but he refuses to let fear take over. He can't leave her behind. His hand stretches further, and after a long pause, Lily's trembling fingers find his. Slowly, cautiously, she moves toward him, each step hesitant but determined. She's trusting him just as he has to trust her. Together, they must make it to the ledge. He takes the first step, his feet scraping against the rock, his knees shaking under the pressure. His hand still grips Lily's, and when she falters, he steadies her, his voice steadying her with quiet reassurance. "Just one more step, Lily. We're almost there." The ledge is barely wide enough for their feet, and Malik feels his balance shift. But he keeps moving forward, each step taking them closer to safety. His mind races, calculating the next move, the next step. They can't stop. Not here, not now. The cliffside, the wind, and the crashing waves, they're all forces against them. But Malik holds on to the thought that they can survive. They will survive. Behind them, the drop grows more menacing, and ahead, the narrow path offers little room to maneuver. Every movement feels like it could be their last. But Malik doesn't let fear control him. He looks back at Lily, her face pale with terror but determined, and he knows she's fighting just as hard as he is. The ledge seems to stretch out endlessly before them, but they keep going, step by step, inch by inch. Malik glances up at the sky, seeing the rays of the setting sun breaking through the clouds, a glimmer of hope. With one last deep breath, he turns to Lily and says, "We can make it. Just a little further." And together they take the next step into the unknown, their fate tied to the cliffside, but bound by their bravery and the trust they've placed in each other. Malik had always known life wouldn't be easy. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, surrounded by buildings that were falling apart, and streets that never seemed to quiet down, he learned early on that survival was a daily battle. His family, though close-knit, never had much. His mother worked long hours at a diner, and his father did whatever he could to make ends meet. Odd jobs, repairs, anything. They were good people, but the world outside didn't seem to care about them. Malik had seen his share of trouble. He'd watched friends get caught up in situations that felt impossible to escape. And yet, through all the struggle, Malik had always found a way to keep his head above water. He learned to rely on his resourcefulness, his ability to think fast, and his courage when faced with danger. It wasn't always enough, but it kept him going. There was no room for fear, no time to let it take over. If you wanted to make it, you had to be quick and smart. And Malik had done just that. But none of the lessons he had learned from life in the city had prepared him for the situation he now found himself in. When he had first seen Lily that morning, she was just another kid out on an adventure, her golden hair shining in the sun. She was different from the other kids he knew. Her clothes clean and pressed, her manners polite, her voice soft. She had the kind of life Malik had only seen from a distance, a life where you didn't worry about your next meal, or whether the lights would stay on. Lily's family had more money than Malik could even imagine, but it was clear she didn't have the same kind of experience when it came to navigating the world. Her parents, constantly wrapped up in their business affairs, never paid much attention to her. She was often left to find her own way, but unlike Malik, she didn't have to fend for herself. Her world was one of comfort, one of certainty, something that Malik couldn't even begin to understand. The two of them had met when Malik was exploring the edge of the cliffs one afternoon. He'd seen her standing by the overlook, peering out at the vast expanse of the sea. She'd looked out of place, and Malik, curious as always, had approached her. They had struck up a conversation about the view, about the birds, about everything and nothing at all. She had been fascinated by his stories of the city, the struggles he faced, and how he navigated the world. Malik had laughed at how much she didn't know about the harsh realities of life. But despite the difference in their lives, they'd somehow connected. She was sheltered, unsure, but Malik saw a spark in her, a curiosity about the world. He agreed to show her some of the more thrilling spots on the cliffside. They wandered farther along the rocky terrain, taking in the view and marveling at the beauty of the landscape. It was a world far removed from the one Malik was used to, and though he enjoyed the sense of adventure, he kept an eye on Lily, who seemed fascinated by everything around her. But then, things took a turn. Without warning, the ground beneath them shifted. A large gust of wind had made the rocks slippery, and Malik found himself slipping just a bit. He caught his balance, but Lily, who was distracted by something on the other side of the cliff, lost her footing. Malik rushed to grab her, but she was already stumbling toward the edge. He managed to pull her back just in time, but they both ended up further from the safe path. Trapped between the jagged rocks and the dizzying drop below, Lily's panic had set in immediately. She had never been in a situation like this, never had to rely on herself in the way Malik did every day. She looked to him for guidance, but Malik knew that the situation was beyond just a simple fix. He wasn't sure how they were going to get out. There was no clear way up, no obvious path down. They were stuck, caught between the beauty of the cliffside and the harsh reality of the cliffs that threatened to take them. Malik had experience in tough situations, but even he had to admit this was something else entirely. Lily's eyes were wide with fear as she clung to the rocks, her hands trembling. "What do we do?" she whispered, barely able to hold back tears. Malik looked at her, trying to steady his own racing heart. She didn't know how to survive this kind of situation. She didn't have the knowledge Malik had gained from a lifetime of hardship. This was something Malik could handle, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed Lily to trust him, to listen to him. She had no choice. They were in this together now. They had no other option but to survive, to find a way to make it through. And so, as the winds howled around them and the sea below threatened to pull them in, Malik took a deep breath and promised himself that he wouldn't let this be the end of their story. Their day of adventure had turned into a test of their courage, resourcefulness, and the bond that had been forged between them. What started as an innocent exploration had now become a fight for survival. Neither of them could turn back, but they would have to rely on each other if they had any hope of making it out alive. Malik's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as the wind whipped around them, each gust threatening to send them tumbling. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing through options. They were dangerously close to the edge now, the ground beneath them shaky and unpredictable. He felt the tremor in the rocks as they shifted slightly beneath his feet. The last thing he wanted was for them both to fall. Malik's eyes darted to the jagged cliffs below, the sharp rocks waiting to tear them apart if they slipped any further. "Hold on tight, Lily," Malik shouted, grabbing her by the arm. He could feel her panic, her body rigid with fear. She had no experience in situations like this. She had lived a life of comfort, of predictability. But now, that world seemed distant, irrelevant. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was survival, and that meant Malik had to think fast. Lily's small fingers tightened around his hand, but she was trembling. The terror in her eyes was unmistakable. "Malik, I don't know what to do. I'm scared." Her voice broke, tears welling up in her eyes. She was so young, so unprepared for the gravity of the situation. She looked at Malik like he was her lifeline, her only hope. Malik swallowed hard, pushing back his own fear. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't about getting out of a tough neighborhood or finding his way home from a bad part of town. This was life and death. His mind raced through all the lessons he had learned on the streets, all the survival instincts he had built. But this was a whole new kind of challenge. He had to get them out of there. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Malik looked around desperately. The path they'd come from was too unstable to go back, and the narrow ridge he'd spotted earlier was their only chance. His heart skipped a beat as he examined it more closely. It was a tight ledge, barely wide enough for them to stand on, but it was the only way forward. If he could get them to the ledge, they might be able to make it to a safer part of the cliffside. But there was a risk. The rocks were slick, and one wrong step could send them both tumbling. "Lily," Malik said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "Listen to me. We can do this. You have to trust me, okay? I need you to hold on to me, and we'll go slow. Don't look down. Just focus on me." His eyes locked with hers, trying to give her something solid to hold on to in the midst of her panic. Lily nodded, her face pale with fear, but her trust in Malik was evident. He had saved her once when she almost fell, and she had no choice but to trust him again. But the uncertainty in her eyes was palpable. Her fingers were still trembling as she clung to his shirt. Malik looked at the ledge again. It was their only chance. The rocks on the cliffside were jagged, some jutting out at odd angles, and the wind continued to howl around them, adding another layer of danger to an already perilous situation. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. There was no time to waste. Taking a deep breath, he nodded to himself. He could do this. They could do this. Slowly, carefully, he moved toward the ledge, making sure each step was steady. His grip tightened around Lily's hand, guiding her along as they inched closer to the narrow pathway. The fear in Lily's eyes didn't subside, but she followed him, step by step, trusting him completely. Every move felt like it might be their last. With each step, Malik was acutely aware of how fragile their situation was. The ledge seemed to narrow even further the more they moved, but Malik didn't look back. He kept his eyes focused ahead, on the narrow space that would bring them safety. He could feel Lily's weight shifting with every step she took, and he knew he had to remain calm. Her fear was contagious, but he had to be her anchor. They made it to the ledge, but the hardest part wasn't over. Malik knew the worst was yet to come. They had to move along the cliffside, inching their way toward what he hoped was a safe passage. Every few feet he checked their surroundings, making sure nothing gave way. Malik's pulse was hammering in his ears as he moved forward, the only sound the rush of wind and the distant roar of the waves crashing below them. Lily, still trembling, kept her eyes glued to Malik, too afraid to look anywhere else. "What if we fall?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We won't fall," Malik said, his voice more confident than he felt. "I won't let you fall." He couldn't let that happen. He refused to let her down now. The path seemed to stretch on forever, each step a reminder of how fragile their situation was. Malik could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He wasn't just trying to save his own life. He was trying to save Lily's too. The fear of falling, of failing, was something he couldn't afford to entertain. They moved in silence, their breath shallow, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Every second felt like an eternity, but Malik kept going. He had to. There was no other option. Malik's heart was racing in his chest as he helped Lily carefully inch her way along the narrow ledge. The rocks underfoot felt jagged, the earth unstable, but there was no turning back now. His every instinct screamed at him to move faster, to get them out of this dangerous situation. He glanced over at Lily, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. But she was clinging to him with a desperate grip. Her fingers dug into his arm as she relied on him completely. "Lily, listen to me," Malik said, trying to steady his breath. He needed to calm her, needed to keep her focused. "We're gonna make it, okay? Just trust me, and keep your eyes on me. We'll get through this together. We have to stay calm." She nodded, but her face still reflected a deep, unshakable fear. Malik could feel her trembling, and it was all he could do to keep his own nerves under control. He had never been in a situation like this, never had to rely on his instincts so much. Yet, in the midst of all the chaos, there was something that burned inside him, something that drove him to keep going. He couldn't fail now, not when Lily was depending on him. The wind howled as the cliffside continued to test their every step. Malik's shoes scraped against the rocks as he led the way, each step forward feeling more fragile than the last. The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough for his feet, and the ground seemed to crumble slightly with each movement. Malik could feel the weight of the moment, the vulnerability of their situation. There was no margin for error. They had to keep moving, or they would fall. "Stay close," Malik said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "I'm right here." Lily didn't say anything, but her grip tightened. She was terrified, and Malik knew it. He understood her fear. He had felt it, too. But now wasn't the time to be afraid. He had to be the strong one, the one who made the right choices. The boy who had grown up in a tough neighborhood, always fighting to survive, was now fighting for someone else's life. That realization pushed him forward, despite the uncertainty. Then, just as they were nearing the end of the ledge, Malik felt his foot slip. It happened so quickly. One moment he was moving carefully, and the next, the ground beneath him gave way. His body jolted, and for a brief second he was off balance. Lily screamed as Malik's grip on the rocks faltered, but he held on to her just in time. He felt the sharp rush of panic surge through him, but he didn't have time to give in to fear. They were still in danger. "Hold on!" Malik shouted, his voice rising in panic as he tried to steady himself. The weight of Lily in his arms threatened to pull him off balance even more, but he gritted his teeth and fought to stay upright. His legs shook from the strain, and he could feel the sharp rocks cutting into his palms. Lily's voice was barely audible through the wind, but he could hear the fear in her voice as she cried out, her hands shaking as she clung to him. "Malik, I can't." "You can. You have to," Malik said, his voice a mixture of determination and urgency. "I'm not going to let you go. Just stay with me. You're safe, okay? You're safe." The world seemed to tilt around them, the cliffside now a blur of unstable ground and the deafening roar of the ocean below. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to keep his footing, to hold on to Lily, and to keep them both from falling. Every muscle in his body screamed from the effort, but he refused to let go. He couldn't let go. Finally, with a Herculean effort, Malik found his footing again. He moved quickly, almost instinctively, placing one foot in front of the other. He didn't stop until they reached a more solid ground, safe, at least for the moment. His legs were shaking, and his body was trembling with exhaustion, but they had made it. They had survived. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Malik stood there, breathing heavily, holding Lily steady as they both processed the magnitude of what had just happened. The immediate danger was over, but the emotional weight of it all was just beginning to sink in. Lily looked up at him, her tear-streaked face still showing signs of her fear, but there was a softness in her eyes now, a look of gratitude, and something else, something deeper. She was no longer just the frightened girl from a privileged family. She had been through something real, something that no amount of wealth or comfort could shield her from. "Thank you, Malik," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the sincerity in her words was unmistakable. Malik nodded, his chest still rising and falling in the uneven breaths. "It's nothing," he said, his voice hoarse. "We made it. Together." The silence between them was filled with a new kind of understanding. It wasn't just about the physical journey they'd just completed. They had both faced something larger than themselves in that moment. The fear of losing everything, the fear of the unknown. And they had survived. They had relied on each other, and in doing so, they had found strength they didn't know they had. As the wind continued to howl around them, and the sea crashed against the rocks below, Malik realized that their bond was something that couldn't be broken. They had walked through fire together and come out the other side, stronger for it. Malik and Lily moved cautiously down the final stretch of the cliff, their bodies bruised and battered from the harrowing climb. The jagged rocks had cut into their skin, their clothes were torn, and every step felt like it required every ounce of energy they had left. But they were making it. The worst was behind them. As they reached the bottom, they both collapsed onto the soft grass at the base of the cliff, breathing heavily, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. Malik's legs were sore from the climb, and his arms felt like they might give out at any moment, but it didn't matter. They were safe. They had survived. Lily sat up slowly, looking around at the vast open space around them, still trying to process everything that had happened. Her hands were still shaking, and she looked at Malik with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The fear that had gripped her earlier was now giving way to something else, something more lasting. Malik glanced at her, his chest still rising and falling with each deep breath. He didn't say anything at first, just took a moment to let the silence between them settle. But Lily, her voice barely above a whisper, broke the quiet. "Malik, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." Her eyes were filled with sincerity as she looked at him, and for the first time, Malik saw something different in her eyes, a deep respect. It was as though the whole world around them had changed in that one moment. She was no longer just the frightened girl who needed saving. She was a person who had lived through something that changed her, something real. Malik shrugged, feeling awkward under her gaze. "It was nothing. We did it together." Lily shook her head, her voice firm. "No, it wasn't nothing. You saved me. You kept me going when I didn't think I could. You were so brave." Malik didn't respond right away. He looked away, staring at the rocky terrain around them, his mind still processing the adrenaline that had carried him through the past few hours. In the moment, it hadn't felt like bravery. It had just felt like the only thing he could do. But hearing her words, hearing how much it meant to her, made him feel something different. He had always thought bravery was a big word for people who did big things, people who were fearless and strong in every situation. But in that moment, bravery had been about doing whatever it took to protect someone else, no matter how scared he was. For the first time, Malik realized how much he had grown through this experience. His life hadn't been easy. It had been full of challenges, and he had faced them with a kind of quiet strength. But now, as he sat on the ground with Lily, something inside him had shifted. He had found a new kind of strength in himself, one that wasn't about surviving alone, but about caring for others, about being there for someone when they needed it most. Lily seemed to sense the change in him as well. She sat next to him, not saying anything for a while, but when she did speak again, her words were different. "I never realized how important it is to depend on someone else," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "I've always had everything I needed, but now I see survival isn't just about being strong. It's about knowing you can count on someone, no matter who they are." Malik looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly as he thought about what she said. Yeah, it's hard to do that, but it's the only way. You can't always do everything alone. The two children sat in silence, letting the weight of the moment sink in. They had both been through something they would never forget, something that had tested their strength, their courage, and their willingness to trust each other. And now, sitting side by side on the ground, they understood each other in a way they hadn't before. For Malik, this was the first time he had ever felt like he was truly seen for who he was. He wasn't just the kid from a rough neighborhood, the one with no money or privileges. In this moment, he was someone who had saved another person's life, someone who had faced real danger and emerged stronger for it. And for Lily, this was the first time she truly understood what it meant to rely on someone else, to step out of the comfort of her sheltered life and face the world as it was. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, one of mutual respect and understanding. They had survived the cliffside together, but they had also survived something else, the beginning of a bond that would last a lifetime. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain, Malik and Lily finally stood up, dusting themselves off. They didn't speak much more as they walked away from the cliff, the fear that had once paralyzed them now replaced by a sense of calm, a quiet understanding that they had made it through the impossible. They hadn't just escaped the cliff. They had escaped something even deeper, a fear of the unknown, a fear of being alone. And in doing so, they had found something far more precious than just survival. They had found each other. This story serves as a powerful reminder that bravery isn't determined by age, wealth, or background. It's defined by the choices we make in critical moments, by the willingness to act despite fear and uncertainty. Malik, though only 9 years old, demonstrated a kind of bravery that transcends the traditional image of a hero. He wasn't a soldier or a superhero. He was just a young boy caught in a terrifying situation. And yet, in that moment, his quick thinking, resourcefulness, and compassion made him the protector of both himself and Lily. Malik didn't have the luxury of formal survival training or the financial resources to escape danger. What he had was courage, something far more powerful than material wealth or status. His decision to lead Lily through the perilous cliffside wasn't driven by arrogance or ego, but by a deep sense of responsibility to keep her safe. His bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting in the face of fear, about putting someone else's survival above his own safety. This, in many ways, is what true heroism looks like. The situation Malik and Lily faced was life or death. But their struggle on the cliffside wasn't just physical. It was a mental and emotional challenge. Malik had to remain calm for both of them, despite the chaos swirling around them. Lily, for the first time in her life, had to confront her own vulnerability, forced to rely on someone else for her safety. Through this shared experience, they formed a bond stronger than words could express. Malik's courage didn't just save their lives, it united them, creating a foundation of trust and mutual respect that neither of them had expected. For Lily, the experience was eye-opening. She had grown up in a world where safety was a given, where she didn't have to worry about survival, let alone depending on someone else. But that day on the cliff, she learned something vital. Courage isn't just about being brave in the moment. It's about understanding that strength comes from within, but also from the people around us. By relying on Malik, she learned that even in the face of overwhelming fear, it's possible to trust, to lean on someone else when you can't stand alone. The story ultimately challenges the idea that bravery is something reserved for adults or those in positions of power. It shows us that courage can emerge from the most unlikely of places. Malik's bravery wasn't the result of extensive training or life experience. It was simply the courage to do what needed to be done in that moment. And in doing so, he demonstrated that heroism doesn't always look the way we expect. This story leaves us with an important question. What defines courage? Is it something we're born with, or is it something we can learn? Malik and Lily's experience suggests that courage is both innate and learned. It's a mixture of instinct, choice, and circumstance. The choice to act when everything around you seems uncertain, the instinct to protect those who need you, and the ability to learn from the situation and grow stronger. These are the qualities that define true bravery. What would you have done in Malik's situation? Would you have had the courage to make the same choices he did, despite the overwhelming fear? Do you believe that courage and survival instincts are learned over time, or are they part of our natural makeup? Let us know in the comments.